Sir. Namaste to all. Myself Nishant, and we are Think India. Think India is a forum of students with nation-first approach, and we have students from premier institutions of India. That those are Indian Institute of Technology, Indian Institute of Management, and National Law Universities. So we have had a lot of lecture series during this COVID lockdown, and we have tried to use it in a constructive way. So taking this series forward, we have invited a scholar name which might or many of you must be familiar with because he comes in upward as well as sir is also associated with Indology Foundation. So we today have Dr. Raj Vedam sir with us. So thank you, sir, for joining us and namaste. So, sir, today will be speaking on examining evidence for ancient Indian civilization. So, not wasting much time, I'd like to request sir to please start.
Okay, you may have to give me a sharing privilege because I can't share my screen.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Yes, sir. I gave you.
Okay, yes, I can see it. So give me just 1 second. Let me share my screen. Tell me when you can see my screen.
Yes, sir. It's visible, sir.
Okay, just 1 minute. I put it to presentation mode. All right, so let me minimize this so I can see my screen because there are too many videos on this one. All right. So once again, thank you very much, Think India, Jharkhand, really for the privilege to talk over here. And I'll be touching on some of the topics I've done in the past, but rounding up with whatever new evidence that we have on looking at the evidence from ancient Indian civilization. And I'd like to point out in my talks that people ask, why is there a need to re-examine the history of the Indian civilization? Well, in any endeavor of science or study, we know that we need to re-examine data when new information has come in. We need to understand how were the old studies done, what methodologies they used to see the validity and whether the issues with that, can we correct them? And if we look at the history of India, we see that up to 5 agencies have controlled the narrative of Indian history. So it turns out that the very first people who came to the India were the colonial people who were looking at colonial narratives, and we can talk about that a little later. They were soon followed by the Eurocentric people, the people who wanted to know who are they as a people, given that Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek seem to have commonalities. They wanted to know who are they as a people. So the Eurocentric narrative also looked at the Indian history because they wanted to say, before they can say who they are as a people, they have to say who are the Indians as a people. So it went to that. It was soon taken over by Western interests. Western interests are people like the church, and not to that extent, but to some extent the mosque. They're the Western interests over here. And today you have the liberal academia bias, which comes in with its own external sociological lenses to study anything in Indian history, culture, heritage is seen through the prism of class dynamics and these kinds of things. And today you have the Marxists. Marxists are controlling the education sector, and they come with their own unique biases and prejudices, and they are also interested in controlling history. So what we see is these 5 agencies have controlled the Indian history and the identity of Indians. History plus ideology has led to a subversion of identity. So this is the message at the top level. Now look at the early motivation. We know that the colonial people, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, and the British were the first to have come to India, taking a look at Indian history and such things from 16th century onwards. They were soon followed by Christian imperialism, the missionaries who took it upon themselves to say that, yes, they need to civilize these Indians and get them to Christianity. I put a couple of them over here, Robert Calvert, Geo Poker, many others. From 1500s, the Portuguese ventures all the way to present times, we see the impact of Christian imperialism on India. And these people, along with colonials, the Christian imperialists, and so on, gave way to the Eurocentric linguistics too, when Max Muller found the commonality, like I said, Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek. People like Herbert Risley, who are anthropologists, they also wanted to come in and see, can we measure the nose and craniometrics and things like that and try to say, who are the Indians? And so they used mechanisms like linguistics, anthropology, and the caste, so-called caste. And between 1700s to present, they imposed certain frameworks of looking at India and studying Indian history. And these early studies in this triangle over here led to the notion of the Aryan invasion or the migration theory. So if you look at it today, this Aryan invasion migration theory has been studied with a whole lot of lenses, like I said, linguistics and so on and so forth, including ethics, sociology. Today it is fortified with archaeology. People like John Marshall, who found the Harappa civilization, people like Maria Gimbutas and Colin Renfro, who study archaeology and try to talk about Aryans. And today you have people like David Reich and the other groups that talk about genetics. So these three things also have impinged on the Hindu or the Indian identity, as I like to call it. And there is still the old frameworks have been repackaged, and we continue to see these frameworks being imposed in India. So these are the claims. The mainstream narrative says that there was something called an Aryan invasion theory. However, the evidence is showing us something else, and I put question marks there. Could it be an out of India? They say Indic thought impacted only the East, but we see it impact the East and the West. They say Indic civilization is recent, but we can show that it is very ancient. They say anything of value in India, whether it is mathematics, astronomy, or whatever, has been borrowed from the Greeks and Babylonians. However, we can show that Indian thought has seeded the Greeks and Babylonians. They say that we are Aryans, Dravidians, and tribal people, but we can show the identities are manufactured. They also say Vedic culture is responsible for poverty, but we can show that invasions are the ones responsible for poverty. So I'm assuming that most of the people here have got analytical background, either engineers or any other kind of analytical degree. So we know that we use models. Anything that we study today, we use a model. We try to see, is my understanding of the real world, can it be encapsulated perhaps through mathematical equations or through semantic equations or through logical equations? In some manner, can I encapsulate reality and take the inputs of the real world and see the outputs of the real world, validate what is happening, if it is not working, tweak some parameter here and there, fix my model. So all of us use models. So I'm saying a good model should be able to explain the scenario coherently with little or no conflict. And I'm saying we have a boatload of data available for history today, whether it's from archaeology, epigraphy, literature, oral records, foreign traveler accounts, science, script, grammar, astronomy, genetics, paleontology, religion. So many pieces of data is available for us. And we are saying that a good model should explain the Indian history multidimensionally. And it should also be used to predict, to fill the gaps. We know that if you have a good model, and if you have some portions of the real data, real world data is unavailable, you can use your model to predict. It should be able to do that. That's what a good model is. Well, today we know that there's a linguistics model used for Indian history, archaeological model, genetics model, and I'm proposing that there's also an astronomy model, and there are other models also, and we need to see where is the evidence taking us. If any of the models don't fit the data well, then a flag goes up and we need to ask what is going on. So models always come with constraints and some implications of using a model and so on. So if we start with the Proto-Indo-European linguistic model for language spread, the proposal is that Homeland is in Central Asia. That is a hypothesis that is built into this model. If you use this model, the implication is there has to be an Aryan invasion theory or a migration theory, 1500 BC from Central Asia. A secondary implication is Sanskrit is an import into India and the Dravidians are separate people. So we also see that if people quote other evidence, it is typically made to fit the linguistic model. And one such example is genetics. Genetics is not an independent line of evidence. It makes use of constraints of the linguistic model in terms of the timelines and parameters and tries to make its own predictions based upon the linguistic model. There is also evidence that does not fit the linguistic model, things like astronomy, archaeology, literary works, climate trends, so on and so forth. There are a lot of them. So I'd like to first talk to you about the linguistic model, where it started out, initially they started out saying that India is the homeland for the languages, and it's from India that the Indo-European languages spread out. That was the initial thought of the colonial people. However, once it discovered the Mitannis and the Hittites, the so-called Indo-Aryans in late 1800s, are found in northern Iraq and Turkey and places like that, the question started and the homeland shifted. This also coincided with the Indian War of Independence. If you remember, it's 1857. Till 1857, the colonials looked upon India in a very favorable way. However, after 1857, the dynamics had changed, the power equation had changed. Indians had to be talked down to. They had to be looked down upon. So that kind of thinking led to, can I request the host to mute everybody except me? Host, can you mute everybody? Hello, are you able to hear me?
Ninsat, unmute yourself.
Everybody except you are muted, sir.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So you can hear me, very good. So let me again go back to presentation mode. I have all kinds of things showing up here, but just a minute. Okay. So we find that after the Indian War of Independence, the power dynamics changed and Indians had to be looked down upon and looked down. So these two things, discovery of the Mitannis, Hittites, Indian War of Independence, changed the entire power dynamics. Linguistic analysis was used by the scholars of that period, and certain timelines are proposed. And they said that the fact that the languages are related implies an ancestral language called a Proto-Indo-European language, and Aryans had to be in India in 1500 BCE. Then they found the Indus Valley civilization. So in early 1900s, once they found that John Marshall and others were working, and they did not appear to be, they tried to see the ruins over there, skeletons over there, and so on. And they proposed that the Aryans had invaded India from the Proto-Indo-European homeland, and the mechanisms they used were linguistics and archaeology. In 2000s, that has become a migration theory from the PIE homeland, and the mechanisms used today are linguistics, archaeology, and genetics. So PIE, we had talked about this in the past. The idea is that there is an ancestral language, and there's no evidence of this, that anybody spoke this. However, there is a proposal that there's an ancestral PIE language. The homeland is somewhere in Central Asia, and from there it spread throughout the world, and it gave rise to Balto-Slavic, Germanic, Italic, Hellenic, Indo-Iranian. And from Indo-Iranian, it led to Iranian and Indic, from Indic to Sanskrit, to all these Northern Indian languages, including Sri Lanka. So this is the hypothesis. So to give you an example, I have tried to reconstruct how would they reconstruct a language for which you have no data, you have no idea, you have no speakers, you have no records, you have got no archaeology, no scrolls, nothing. So how did the scholars reconstruct this language? I've given the example of the wheel. The wheel is there, this very familiar bullock cart that you see in Indian villages. There is also there in Harappa, this wheel that you can see over here, including clay toys found in Harappa and so on. And if a civilization has got a technology for a wheel, you'd think that it'll also have words for other components over there. For example, for wheel in Sanskrit it is chakra, Latin it is rotem, in Greek it is kuklos, in Hittite tokarian. The word for yoke is yoga or lugan, and for nave or hub, nabya, umbilicus, or axis, aksa or axis. The proposal for reconstruction is that there was an ancient PIE language which had a word like kweklo. Whenever you see a star in a word, it means it is not a real word. It is not something that somebody has spoken. It is a reconstructed word, something reconstructed in academia. So from the kweklo word, it gave rise to the Proto-Indo-Iranian word called kekro, which is also a reconstructed word. And that gave rise to the Sanskrit word chakra. So this is one of those proposals. So what you're seeing is that we are seeing that most of the data for the Proto-Indo-European language reconstruction has come from Sanskrit. A little data came from Old Germanic, from Latin and others, but those are much younger than Old Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is the one that gave rise to most of these reconstructions. All right, let me try to erase some of these annotations that somebody is doing out there. Remember, if you annotate, guys, everybody sees it. So let me remove that, and let me remove this, and let me remove something else. May I ask the host to do this annotation removal if somebody puts it? Let me get rid of this. Okay. All right. So, so like I said, there are two modern narratives for the Indo-European language expansion, and the thought leaders are Maria Gimbutas and Colin Renfrew. Maria Gimbutas came in the 1950s with the Kurgan or the Steppe hypothesis, and she said that in Central Asia, once they domesticated the wild horse, they got chariots, they had swords and iron, so they started conquering. They went all over the place in 2 waves or 3 waves. The one wave went towards Ukraine, and from there to Europe, and all those things, becoming the corded ware people, the beaker ware people, and all these kind of things. These are the archaeological finds, by the way, for these people. They did not exist before 3000 BCE, came after that time frame. And on the other hand, Colin Renfrew was against this theory. He got the Anatolian or the Turkey hypothesis, and he said that the language expansion followed the invention of agriculture in Turkey, and it spread in 6500 BC. That's what led to this. However, today people are favoring the Kurgan or the steppe hypothesis. And here's an example of some archaeology from there. This is the Kurgan burial mound in Kazakhstan, 500 BCE. This is one example of that. Another example in Georgia, chariot burial, 2000 BCE. This is what it looks like. And this is an example of the corded ware that you see. This is the Andronovo people, corded ware people. And from this part of the world, supposed to have gone over here. So what is this Kurgan or steppe hypothesis? This one says that between Caspian Sea and Black Sea, you had the Yamnaya people, 3500 BCE. By 2500 BC, they spread to the west and to the east as Andronovo people, and the corded ware people on this side. By 1500 BCE, I'm trying to move this cursor here. By 1500 BCE, they are specialized into Hittites, Mycenaeans, BMAC, and so on. And they've also entered into India through Sindh and so on. This is the beginning of the Aryan invasion theory. And by 500 BCE, they're entrenched in the Ganga plain, and they become the Indo-Aryans, and you see the appearance of the Dravidian, so-called Dravidian people here. So this at a very high level is a Kurgan or the steppe hypothesis. And now we can say what is Aryan invasion theory as understood by the modern scholars. So they say bands of male warriors from Central Asia migrated to India around 1500 BCE. They effectively replaced the existing civilization and brought the Sanskrit language, Vedic ecosystem, and so on. Lot of common assertions. There have been scholars who are contesting these theories right from day one, and it's of interest to see how the OIT means out of India, AIT means Aryan invasion theory. These are two camps on two opposite sides, and what are their assertions? The OIT, for example, says Harappa archaeology does not show any sign of invasion. AIT says maybe it's not an invasion, it's a migration. OIT says Harappa trade material has been found in Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and Oman, all these kind of places, and it implies that it was trading that spread languages rather than language coming from outside. AIT says no, migration was because of horse, chariot, and those are the things that spread the Indo-European language. Well, OIT says, you're talking about horse. Do you know the Rig Veda has got a 34-rib horse in this particular verse, whereas a Central Asian horse has got 36 ribs. So what are you talking about horse? AIT camp says, Rig Vedic people did not know how to count, and they mistook 34 for 36. And on this side, they say Rig Veda is mentioning Saraswati River and many mandalas. And on this side of the camp, they say Rig Veda, the Saraswati River, is mythical. And you can read some of these things in Conrad L's document, Indo-Aryan Controversy. Is a real debate. And similarly, these are the common things that you see. People say Slavic and Celts had Vedic deities. How? That means Sanskrit came from Central Asia. They say Greek stories are similar to Hindu stories. How? That means Sanskrit came from Central Asia, is common to both these cultures. They say Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Iran are Sanskrit, Mitanni, Hittites. How? It proves that Sanskrit came to India from Central Asia. Rig Veda, they say Indra had a yellow beard. How is it possible? It proves that Sanskrit came to India. So everything is a quick conclusion, which is very, very illogical and irrational, as you can see. The minute something comes, they jump to a conclusion, whereas a true logical, rational person examines all sides of the debate to see the weaknesses of models. Is this model right? Does it explain the scenario well? Is the data well explained? Is there some other alternate hypothesis? That is what I do as an engineer, trying to understand when data like this is thrown. And let's take a look at that. Let's examine the model fit if one has used the linguistics model. Linguistics model, one of the very big developments over here was a so-called Centum-Satem classification. For example, the word in Sanskrit for 100 or in Avestan is Satem, Satem, so Satem. Whereas in Latin, it becomes centum. So the KH, K, becomes the hard K in Greek or the H of Germanic, whereas the KH becomes Sh in Sanskrit. So this was the proposal. This is how linguistics works. When linguistics says a vowel or a syllable mutated from one to the other with some probability, then basically they're proposing, these are the rules of the change, migration, grammar, and other such things. They say this is how it changed, this is a migration, proves a migration, and so on. So one would imagine that the Centum-Satem classification is such that if you think Centum is European, we see Tocharian over here, that is approximately where the Tarim Basin is. They appear to be, all these are, sorry, this one is seen to be Centum, however, this is in Asia. It's a problem over here. And similarly, Hittites in Asia, Satem is assumed to be Asian, but you see that the Slavic countries are all in this Satem classification. Conrad also calls out the Proto-Bangani people in the Himalayan region. They also use a Centum classification. How on earth is it in India you have a Centum classification? So this linguistic model of this nice Centum-Satem classification, the rules they propose for migration of language seems to be in question. The red flags going up. The red flags are saying, how come that this migration does not appear to be a neat, nice division? You can't draw a least squares line and say, everybody on that line is this, everybody on this line is this. You can't do that. This appears to be a problem over here. So it has opened some red flags. That is the bottom line. Two thought leaders over here. One of them is Srikant Thelagiri. Other one is Nicholas Kazanas. These are the books they've written. I'm not going to go into their arguments. But the bottom line is, Srikant Thelagiri ji comes and says, the Proto-Indo-European homeland has to be in Northwest India. Only then it makes sense. It does not make sense. It is in Central Asia. He gives very, very strong reasons and arguments which are logical and rational. Please read his book, Rig Veda, where you can see more of those details. Nicholas Kazanas comes with very strong views. He examines a lot of the stories of the Indo-Europeans and looks at the language and other such things. And he says, if there was a migration, it is so ancient that we don't have any data to reconstruct PIE today. And he says, in his view, all the mainstream academic publications are worthless. So very, very strong views. So I'd like to propose the astronomy model as one of the things that we need to bring into the mix. And I've talked about this at length in my previous talks. I won't go very deep into that. All I want to point out is the Nakshatra Rasi is the astronomical model used in ancient India to mark the passage of time. It was a division, the nakshatra is a division of the sky in 27 segments and 13 1/3 degree segments. And the name of the nakshatra derives from a principal bright star in that division of the sky. So when you see Chitra, Vishaka, Jyeshta, and so on, these are all names of the stars that are present in that section of the sky. Secondly, we talked about the concept of the month. The lunar month over here, the Chaitra Masa, Falguna Masa, Magha Masa, and so on. These refer to either the new moon or the full moon being the indicator. If the full moon appears in the Chitra Nakshatra, that month is called the Chaitra Masa. So in some parts of India, they use full moon. In some parts of India, they use a new moon as a marker. That is the only change. Otherwise, it was a fairly common model throughout India. You also had Rashi, which is a division of the sky in 30 degree segments, and there are 12 Rashis additionally over here. And you see a listing of the nakshatras in two of our ancient books, the Vedanga Jyotisha and the Surya Siddhanta, and they are fairly the same as you can see throughout these things. And this is the principal Western identified star. Kritika is Eta Tauri, Rohini is Alpha Tauri, Mrigashira Lambda Orionis. And you can follow through all the different constellations and the number of the stars over there, identified with the nakshatras. And that is how today we can look at that and say, yep, that's what that nakshatra is. And if you take a look at the classical languages of India, whether you look at Tamil, Malayalam, Kannada, Telugu, Gujarati, Marathi, you find that the names are approximately the same throughout India with small changes. Wherever I shown in Tamil, the color is different over here. The names from Ardra become Thiruvadirai, for example, and so on. This shows to us that the model is very, very ancient. It is so ancient that it has percolated throughout India and has undergone regional variational changes also. If it was a recent model, it might not have had time to undergo changes. The fact that it has undergone changes also indicates to us the antiquity. How old could the nakshatra be? In the Atharva Veda, in this Griffith translation, we find a listing of the nakshatra names over here. It is fully developed. It is not as if it is partially developed. You find that all the nakshatra names are here. So that gives us an indication that it is at least as old as Atharva Veda, lower bound. It could be much, much older than that also. One more work, Taittiriya Samhita, in this particular verse, again, we see the fully developed nakshatra model coming here. And this is supposed to be even more ancient than the Atharva Veda. And I apologize for this June 11th, today is 28th, but this serves as an example. If our ancients looked at the sky, how did they see these nakshatras? How did they see these various entities in the sky? This helps us to understand. So this green line here is a horizon, and over here, the sun is here. So this is the day sky, and everything above is a night sky over here. Whenever ancient Indians talked about nakshatra, it was always when the moon appears in the eastern horizon. This is the east over here, east, north, and west and south is towards us. When the moon appears in the eastern horizon, which longitudinal nakshatra was it in? And here it turns out to be Shatabhisha. So on this particular day, the June 11th, it would have been Shatabhisha nakshatra from almost 1 o'clock in the morning. It would have been Shatabhisha nakshatra because the moon appeared in that nakshatra. And the nakshatras are all shown over here. Ancient Indians had new Dhruv Tara, that was a polar star. And today we can take the latitudes and longitudes, project them on the sky, and they become celestial coordinates. So this becomes 90 degrees, North Pole, so 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. The celestial equator. On the day of the equinox, the sun would be exactly on the celestial equator, and our ancestors are able to measure that. Then during the period of Uttarayana and Dakshinayana, as Dakshinayana happens, it goes south and south and south till it reaches minus 23.3 degrees. Then a 6-month northward course, it goes Uttarayana till it reaches plus 23.3 degrees. So this motion of the sun through the minus 23 to plus 23 was known to Indians, and they could mark the extremal points, the solstice points, equinox points. They knew when it will happen over there. They could measure the solar year. If you're wondering, for example, how did Indians know solar year if they did not know about revolution? Well, it's because they could measure this. They could measure this duration of the sun's movement in the sky. They could talk about the solar year and so on. They also knew when the sun appears here, which nakshatra was it against? And they marked out these things. And because of this phenomenon of Indians calling out what was the nakshatra, Surya nakshatra, when it was equinox or solstice, we can use a phenomenon of precision to date these things fairly precisely. In my earlier talks, I've talked about this at length. I don't want to go into detail there. In brief, if there are people who haven't heard this before, precision is a phenomenon that is followed by the Earth. Earth's axis of rotation is this North Pole. So I took this for the latitude of Houston. Houston, this is about minus 29 degrees, if I'm not mistaken. The 29 degrees, we can see the polar star. In India, in Bangalore at least, I think it is 19 degrees. So it is even lower in the horizon. And if you go to Sri Lanka, it is almost at the equator. So the axis of rotation is almost there at the horizon. So Earth appears to be rotating in Sri Lanka as if it is lying down. In Bangalore, it is like this. You guys are in Jharkhand, so I think it's around 20 degrees or 22 degrees. It's rotating like this. In Houston, it is here. If you go to Alaska, the axis of rotation is right up in the sky and it's rotating like this. I hope you understand. That's why it's called a Mariner's star. So this axis of rotation is also has one more degree of motion. It is slowly tracing a path in the sky that takes 26,000 years to complete. And this red line that you see here, this is something called the precession cycle. This axis of rotation rotates like this, and it takes 26,000 years to complete. Because of this phenomenon, the points where the cardinal points where solstice or equinox happens changes over time. Whatever was the nakshatra at solstice today, 1,000 years before or 2,000 years before, it would be something different. And because of that, this is an excellent clock of the sky, celestial clock for 26,000 years. So based on that phenomena, we can talk about the antiquity of our text. Vedanga Jyotisha, for example. Vedanga Jyotisha, several scholars try to date the Vedanga Jyotisha. However, because of a certain verse, Rig Vedanga Jyotisha 5 and 6 or 6 and 7 of Yajur Vedanga Jyotisha, we can date it to 1400 BCE. Excuse me. That is based on the winter solstice at Dhanista Nakshatra. This phenomenon is there in the Vedanga Jyotisha. So because in our planetarium software, we can simulate this today and we can see when was the sun at the winter solstice, when it was also the Dhanista Nakshatra. It turns out to be 1440 BCE. So by looking at archaeo-astronomical phenomena that is present in our text, we can use the phenomenon of the celestial clock through precision to date back fairly precisely when this phenomena might have occurred. Using that, we can date Vedanga Jyotisha. There is Rishi Yajnavalkya's work on Shatapatha Brahmana, where he notes that Kritika Nakshatra does not move from the east direction. So based on this idea, we know that we can date it back to, we can crank back our calendars, planetarium software and see when was there a heliacal rising of Kritika. Why heliacal rising? Because he said Kritika never swerves from the east direction. True east is only at the time of equinox. You can say sun is rising there exactly on the celestial equator, 0 degrees. So when was Kritika on the celestial equator and when did it rise with the moon, with the sun? We know that was in 2982 BCE. This is how we know the date of Shatapatha Brahmana. Similarly, there appears to be an ancient epoch encoded in the tables. Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta, Puranas, Pulisa Siddhanta, Brahmagupta, Albarni, Aihole temple refers to this. Lee Gentle, he came to Tamil Nadu and he got some tables, published his tables of Trivellor. He's a Frenchman who came there. He sent these tables to Cassini. Cassini studied these astronomical tables and he said that it seems to be referring to an epoch on the midnight of February 17th, 3102 BCE, subsequently studied by Playfair, Bentley, Colebrook, Burgess, and they all said the Surya Siddhanta is referring to the same phenomenon. It turns out to be a rare conjunction of planets, sun, moon, and the Revathi Nakshatra, and that's what I simulated here, where Revathi Nakshatra is over here, the sun is in Revathi Nakshatra, sun is clustered here, so is Guru, Shukran, Shani, Mangala, and Buddhan, which is basically Jupiter. And you see Venus over here, you see Saturn, you see Mercury, and you see Mars. They're all clustered in the Revathi Nakshatra. So this is an amazing instance where there's an ancient epoch encoded in our tables. Similarly, if you take a look at, I'm not going to go deep into these stories, but Aditi is well known as a deity in the Rig Veda, where she's the mother of the Devas, and with a co-sister, she's also the mother of the Daityas. And there is a reference to Punarvashu Nakshatra that is derived from Aditi. This was decoded by Balagangadhar Tilak as well as Professor Abhayankar. They say the verses in Rig Veda referring to Aditi is talking about vernal equinox in the Punarvashu Nakshatra. So if you see when was the vernal equinox last in the Punarvashu Nakshatra, it turns out to be a staggering date of 6000 BCE based upon the archaeological phenomena of the Rig Veda. Similarly, there is Ashwinis are also mentioned, the Rig Veda, the Puranas, many verses talk about them. We know the story of Surya and Sanjana. So Sanjana is the wife of Surya. So she gives birth to the Ashwini twins, but she finds that Surya is too hot for her. So she leaves a shadow, Chaya, in her place, and she flees off to the southern region, cooler region. She can't handle the sun. So sun is in northern hemisphere, she's in the southern hemisphere. So eventually sun discovers the deception and he follows her in the form of a mare and goes to the southern regions to search for her. She leaves Ashwinis with Chaya, which means Ashwinis are in the northern hemisphere, whereas she's gone to southern hemisphere, and Surya too has gone to southern hemisphere according to the story. So once again, this is decoded by Balagangadhar Tilak as well as Abhyankar. And they say the Rig Vedic verses that say Ashwinis appear at dawn for their share of sacrifice, that refers to a heliacal rising of Ashwini, once again winter solstice, because the sun has gone to the south to search for Sanjana. In northern hemisphere it is winter solstice. So this phenomena happened in 7200 BCE, if you decode this phenomena correctly over here. Similarly, in this book, recent book that came out by Dr. Anil Narayanan, he calls out the Swati Nakshatra observation at Surya Siddhanta. Swati is the star that in Greek is called Arcturus. If you see the Big Dipper, it points to Arcturus in the Boots constellation. Now, we know that from our perspective, it appears the stars are fixed in the sky, but we know it's so far away, they also have a proper motion. They're also going around the galactic center with us, but they're not in synchronism. They may be faster, they may be slower, and all these kind of things. So from our perspective, that three-dimensional motion, it's got a spatial velocity, transverse velocity, and a radial velocity, but we can't observe those things. What we can say is, if there is a reference angle, how quickly is this reference angle changing? This angle mu, how quickly is that changing? So that refers to the proper motion. And we know that Swati is one of the fastest stars in the sky in principal motion after the Bernard star. It is 2 arc seconds in a year. Swati is there in the ancient Greek record. It turns out that today's position of Swati is off by 1 degree compared to the Greek record. So based upon this, we know that the Greek records are 1800 years old. Swati is also mentioned in Surya Siddhanta. So if you see, it is 6 degrees off from the Surya Siddhanta measurement to where it is today. So if you take 6 degrees multiplied by minutes, multiplied by seconds, and divided by 2, you get 10,000 years or 8,000 BCE. Staggering amount of time, which shows that there's a core set of measurements in Surya Siddhanta, which is very, very ancient and has been layered upon in very many periods, maybe up to the time of Aryabhatta and so on. Very, very interesting. So what I've shown is many instances of interest are dated with astronomical measurements encoded in text. And today, additionally, archaeology in the country has caught up with astronomy. Just about 20 years back, if I go around saying that Surya Siddhanta has got 8,000 BCE in it, or the other such things, they'll laugh and say, where is archaeology? We only know Harappa, 3,000 BCE. Now we are talking about 8,000 BC. What's going on? However, today in Rakhigarhi and Birana, we have gone up to 10,000, 9,000 years before present, 7,000 BC, 8,000 BC, and so on. So archaeology has caught up with astronomy today. That is the bottom line. So we can use the astronomy as a rebuttal to the Aryan invasion theory model. Max Muller, he proposed something called relative chronology for the books of India, the Sanskrit books. He proposed 4 periodizations. Chandas period, 1200 to 1000 BC, when the earliest books of Rig Veda were written. Mantra period, remaining books of Rig Veda. Brahmana period for Sama, Yajurveda, Aranyakas and Upanishad. And the Sutra period for the 6 Vedangas, Siksha, Chandas, Meter, and all these kind of things. However, today from astronomy, we're seeing something different. Colebrook has found that Vedanga Jyotisha goes to 1400 BCE. So where is Vedanga Jyotisha in 1400 BCE and Max Muller's date for Sutra period, including Vedanga Jyotisha, at 200 BCE? There's a huge disconnect. Shatapatha Brahmana we saw is 2982 BCE, whereas the Brahmana period, according to Max Muller, is 600 BCE. Very, very big discrepancy. Similarly, Rig Veda talked about Ashwinis and Aditi to ancient periods of time, so it's totally out of whack with this Chandas and Mantra period. So clearly, there's a problem with Max Muller's model. Whatever he has used a linguistic model, we have got red flags going up. Red flag is saying it looks like the internal evidence of the Sanskrit text have got dates that far exceed the dates proposed by linguistics. So we have problems coming in. So there are some people who went to Max Muller and asked him, look here, Max Muller, what is going on? Your model does not seem to be correct and so on. So he was so upset with the criticism on his chronology, he wrote his entire book on that. I recommend you download and read it. So he only accepted Colebrook's date for Vedanga Jyotisha, 1400 BC, and others he just said categorically, I don't believe the Indian texts, all unreliable, you cannot use it for dating and so on. Very, very unscientific way of saying these things. But such a view is used till the present day by some Indian scholars. They dare not use Purana evidence, dare not use Sanskrit text evidence, because Max Muller has set the stage. He's already said these are unreliable for dating. So that same kind of thinking is percolated till the present day without the slightest attempt by scholars to decode what are the methods he used. How can we see the red flags in his method? How can we deconstruct the methods and propose better methods? Such a kind of analytical work, in my opinion, has not taken place sufficiently well. So today, people are making use of genetics to look at the past, and I won't go in detail. I think I'm running out of time over here. People have made use of a lot of different ways to construct the past. All I want to say is my confidence level with genetics is not exactly very high. There are three major kind of studies that come out of genetics. One is the presence or absence of a genetic marker. This is the differences in the genome. Now, if I say that that person has got this particular marker and I don't have that marker, that is a fact, because you can actually go take the genetic samples and do the sequencing and read out the data and say, yep, he's got that, you don't have that. So this part of it is fact, so we can accept this. However, if I say in a room of 100 people, 20% have got this marker, 30% have got that marker, and this marker came from that part of the world to this part, you're talking about density, you're talking about rate of change, you're talking about all these kind of things. I got problems starting from there because of the data that you're using. I've got problems over there. Finally, people say that this population over here inherited from that ancient population in that part of the world, so much of RNA or whatever came from there to India, direction of flow, and so on and so forth. I have major problems with that. I've shown that as a downward arrow and red link over here. So I'm saying the concerns with methodology and results cannot be global. You have to study the models, methodology, data, samples, claims before you admit these things. And this is a very mathematical audience, so I think you'll understand what I'm saying, that there are two major things you can do with ancestry estimation today in genetics. One of them is called the admixture problem. Admixture problem is if I have one ancient population, let's say Central Asia, another ancient population, let's say Harappa, and let's say I got these samples, my problem is how is the present populations of India and Central Asia related to these ancient samples? So what is a mathematical model of progression? From there on, it's called the hidden Markov chain model, and some statistical parameters are used with unknown coefficients. Typically, it's a model-based estimation where you propose a set number of generations, let's say 100 generations from that sample to current times. Then you say that there's a rate of change for some parameters, some assumed mutation changes. These are all probabilistic models now. And then you go about trying to see in an optimization problem with unknown coefficients, how can I change it? They use a QP optimization, quadratic programming, and try to see how can I change the parameters so that it converges to some model. Once it's converged, they'll say, aha, it converged, so I know what percentage of that marker is inherited by the present population. I know how many of the present day populations alleles are present in the ancient population, things like that. This is one kind of analysis. Another kind of analysis is I've got a whole boatload of data from Iran to Tamil Nadu. I got all kinds of genetic samples. Now I need to try and understand how are these samples related to each other in the context of all the markers that they carry. And we do something called principal component analysis using eigenvalue analysis, you know about these kind of things. And basically, it's a multivariate analysis by doing that. So two kinds of analysis, and I have major problems. What are the assumptions? Is the model appropriate? What kind of scaling did you use in your mathematical problem? Did you get convergence? Is it the real convergence point? How did you initialize your problem? It's a nonlinear problem. Where you land up depends on where you initialize it, how you initialize it. How did you get the Hessian? Is the Hessian a constructed Hessian? Or is it something that you have the data for? Is there global optimality? In other words, how many solutions does your model admit? If it admits many solutions, you converge to a solution. How do you know it is the solution? How many solutions does your problem have? Many, many issues are there. And my mantra is, just because convergence is obtained, it does not confer a certificate of correctness. One has got to see, why is it unique? Why is your solution unique? Typically what people do is they align it with historical assumptions, things like linguistic data. Linguistic data says 1500 BC, so I'll assume 100 generations or 200 generations. So the constraint is built into the problem. Within that constraint, you seek convergence. Within that constraint, once it's converged, then you read out the values and say this is what has happened. For example, if you take your Google map and say, I want to go in New Delhi, let's say, I'm at some hotel, maybe at some 5-star hotel, I'm sitting in Hyatt Regency. From Hyatt Regency, I want to go to Indira Gandhi T3 terminal. How do I go there? Google Maps says you can go by this road, you can go by this road, you can go by this road. This will take 20 minutes. Accident on this road, don't go here. This will take 100 minutes, and so on. So you go on this route, you selected that route, and you say that when I went on that route, I counted 20 apartments, I counted 30 gas stations, I counted 5 restaurants, I counted so many other things. And then you say, aha, this is all my data because I counted all these things and these are present, my model is correct. My issue is, if you went by the other route, you'd have counted a different number of restaurants, a different number of gas stations, a different number of apartment buildings, and so on. So just because in a given path you encountered certain observations, it does not make it canonical. There are problems with that. So just keep this in mind when I'm doing the red flag analysis over here. So early on, very beginning, people use empty maternal mitochondrial DNA to show how did ancient man spread through the world. So the proposal in the 2000s time frame was that a group of individuals left Africa, and their descendants, generation by generation, they populated these parts of the world up to Sumatra between 85,000 to 75,000 years ago. However, this does not mean that this is the beginning of the this is the beginning of humans in India, because we have got artifacts today that show that humans were present in India even in 350,000 years ago, even 180,000 years ago. So if one takes away the message that modern humans came only 85,000 years ago, that could be mistaken. Empty DNA is saying you have an African component coming in this time frame. And if you look at other kinds of analysis that look at the Y chromosome, for example, this is one sample study, 2006, that shows that many Indians are mostly the L haplogroup, R1A, J2, and H, and these are the relative concentrations that they find in the country. A different study in 2018 in Science that talks of the same 4 major haplogroups: Northern India, R1A, H, L, the pie chart shows you that, East India, West India, South India. I put this here to show that you take 2 different studies and they start showing you different percentage of the markers in different regions of the world. So the question to ask is, why do different studies show different percentage of markers? That means there are issues with the sampling that you use, the size of the population, the mix that you use in the population, and so on. So one has got to see the age of the mutations, their origins, subsequent mutations before one starts making claims. These red flags are what I'm calling out and saying, look, there are problems. These are all studies, data-dependent outcomes. These are not global studies. One has got to be narrow with the claims. You must say that in the context of the data that I've used, here's a narrow claim that you can make. You can't say that I use about 1,500 samples throughout India, now I got the answer for the caste system or some such rubbish like that. That doesn't work. Again, if you look at the origins of R1A, different researchers, Bashu 2003 to Thangaraj in 2010, they say R1A probably in Central Asia, South Asia, Central Asia, North India. Various researchers have got various opinions. I put this here to show a lack of consensus over here. And bottom line is empty DNA or the Y chromosome, the rational outcome would be it does not validate the linguistic model. One more example of a problem. David Reich, he says that Central Asians and Indians are related through the R1A Z93 marker, and they say that the most recent common ancestor is 4,000 years ago. However, you take Lookout's study, and he says the same Central Asians and Indians are related through R1A Z93, and the common ancestor is 15,000 years ago. So here you are, 2 studies and 2 diametrically opposite results. This is an example that I'm giving, different samples are going to give you different results because these are all convergent dependent. You have nonlinear models. You're initializing them in a certain way. You're encoding history assumptions in a certain way. You're converging to an answer that you want and calling out the data out of that. So these are the issues that with these kind of studies. In 2018, for example, David Rice's group came and said that around 7,000 BCE or so, after that, Iranian pastoral farmers came to India, became Northern Indians, ancestral Southern Indians. Then after 3000 BC, Yamnaya people entered into India. They became the ancestral North Indians, R1A, business and all those kind of things. And this is how the mix of India happened. When this paper came out in my 2018 talks, I criticized this, saying that Vedas and the Puranas are talking about the Anu and the Drihyu that migrate out of India. And how does that reflect in your data? It doesn't show in your data. I said that Bhagavad Purana, Vishnu, Vayu, Brahmanda, Matsya Purana, Rig Veda, all are talking about Anu and Drihyu who go out of India. Are we going to discard the internal evidence that we have because they're supposedly, Max Muller told us, don't consider these texts? Or are they valid indicators for us, our ancestors' observations of data, people moving out of India? Are we going to use that or not? What about the drying up of Saraswati? What about the 200-year drought that happened in India around 2000 BCE? Wouldn't they have caused outward migrations? So none of that is accounted for over here, and I called out all these problems. And what do you know, in 2019, they came out with another paper in Science where they retracted their earlier data. What they had done is that added 11 more samples in cultural contact with Harappa people at Iran. And guess what? The minute you put additional data, when the earlier paper came out, I said, what is the sensitivity of your result? What would happen if I take a few data points out? Will you still converge to the same answer? What will happen if I put some other data points in? How robust is your convergence? Is it going to converge to the same answer, or will it go to a different answer? If it goes to the different answer, that means you are strongly dependent upon one data point over there. And guess what? The minute they put 11 additional samples, they converge to a different answer. In that different answer, they say, no, 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 doesn't look like ancestral pastoral people came into India. However, after this Aryan invasion did take place, and this kind of migration is very much still there. This is their latest result. I don't buy this either. Now, their co-researchers at Vasant Shinde and Neeraj Rai and others, they came with the concept of indigenous Harappa people. And so basically their conclusion is that the people that we see in India are a mix of the Indus Valley clan, who also have a component of the Andamanese hunter-gatherer. And if you want to see relation between these people and Anatolians, you must go back before 10,000 BCE when there's a common ancestor. And from that split, you start seeing Iranian hunter-gatherers and so on and so forth until they start mixing with Anatolian Iranian farmers over here. So the model has changed now. The model has changed in the context of the Harappa people and the ancient Indian DNA, but they're still stuck to their claim of this Aryans coming into India. And I am coming here and saying, look, the internal evidence of Indian texts do not permit this so-called migration into India. If it was, it is a non-issue. If it is not there in the numbers that you're counting, R1A, you need to see the ancestry of that. 30,000 years ago, R1A is found in the Indian region. If you look at Peter Underhill's study, 15,000 samples that he used across different populations, and he says that origin of R1A, the mutation appeared approximately 30,000 years ago near Iran, India. That is a time frame. So many issues are there, the genetics data. Can't do that in a short talk like this, but would recommend that one has got to be critical, look at all the studies in various dimensions, and bottom line, one cannot globalize the results, and one can only admit very narrow claims. That is the bottom line. So I'll quickly conclude this talk. There's several other evidence that does not fit with this Aryan invasion or hypothesis. One of them is the river Saraswati. If you remember, the Aryan invasion or migration people said Saraswati is a mythical river. However, this paper that came from Anirban Chatterjee and others from IIT, I think Kanpur or Kharagpur, I forget, November 2019. So that paper clearly is talking about the mineralogy of the soil in these parts that has changes and exposed to water and so on. And they find typical of glacier-fed rivers and so on in sand layers 3 to 10 meters below the surface of the modern Ghaggar in stretch of 300 kilometers up to the Pakistan border. In other words, not a small stream. It's not a small lake. 300 kilometers long. That's a river we're talking about over here. So they're calling out that, yes, there existed this river over here. If you look at B.B. Lal, archaeologist, towards the terminal part of his career, he came out with a paper talking about continuity of the civilization. He called into question the periodization. We have been taught in our textbooks that there was the Harappa period. Harappa period gave rise to the Vedic period, Buddhist period. We study all those kind of things. However, he's saying there's a cultural continuity. If you look at this so-called Mohenjo-daro seal of Pashupati, it shows a yoga position. It has got swastika. It has got a Sindur symbol in the terracotta figurines over there. It has got a Namaste pose. It has got, in Kalibangan, you have a Shivalinga over there. You've got yoga asana position found in Kalibangan and other places showing yoga. So clearly, the so-called Vedic concepts do not come later in the chain, but they are embedded within the Harappa artifacts itself, giving rise to the ideas, the continuity of civilization. Similarly, the famous dancing girl pose is also found from Birana to Meghar. You find the same thing, very interesting. Iron in Telangana, 2200 BC. Remember, the story is that Aryans brought Iron Age to India in 1500 BCE. However, this paper is saying that, rather this newsprint is saying that K.P. Rao found in Telangana artifacts of knives, blades, and so on, tested for carbon dating, or sorry, simulated luminescence method dating, comes to 1800 to 2400 BC, much before the so-called Aryan invasion. Then the Sanauli chariot burials, right? Not one, not two, many chariot burials found in Sanauli. And I recommend you to take a look at this video, Warriors of Sanauli, with the chief architect, archaeologist over there, where he's saying that these chariots are clearly horse-bound chariots. These are not bullock chariots. These are horse chariots. He's also found evidence of a horse whip in addition. So this invalidates the notion that Aryans brought the horse and chariots to India by the material evidence that we found over here. Then this paper that came out in 2018 in Current Science that says there was paddy cultivation in the Ganga plain at a very ancient period of time. This invalidates the claim that agriculture was invented in Turkey, 7000 BC, and spread to India. So it appears that there's already paddy and other things growing in India in that time frame. This is another interesting paper on mouse migration brought out by Premendra Priyadarshi, highlighted this. This is from this paper in 2007 in genome biology by these researchers. So these people set out to try to see where is the ancestor of the modern house mice they find in India, and in the world. And they found that the ancestor is in India. It's from India. They went to Madagascar, to Northern Africa, Europe, China, Southeast Asia, all these places. And they found that the ancestor is also about 12,000 years old, the genome-wise. So very, very interesting. If you see this paper and this paper, put them together, it appears that in your house or elsewhere, storeroom, you put paddy, mice are going to come there. So as paddy is exported to the rest of the world, mice are going to follow along. So it looks like mice have followed agriculture. Very, very powerful if you take this 2007 paper and this 2018 paper, and it seems to be calling out of India over here. Then this is a paper that came in Science in 2019, Zebu and Mitanni Hittite lands, northern Turkey and other such places. They found that all of a sudden, around 4,200 years ago, there was an exceedingly large number of this humped bull artifacts found in the fossil layers over here, and they're calling this out in this paper. They say that this drought that was there 4,200 years ago in the Indus Valley, multi-century drought, that is what led to people migrating out of this Indus Valley and settling in Mitanni lands and so on. And I'm correlating that with the Akkadian seal in the Louvre Museum in 2200 BC that shows the Indian longhorn bull. Very, very important because the Indian buffalo is adapted to the arid conditions of India. And that is very, very valuable if you go to places where there's a drought and so on. So I think I will stop over there. I have a whole lot of other things to talk about. I don't think there's time to do that. I wanted to talk about the fact that India's got a highly advanced knowledge system, and the epistemology of Indian knowledge works. How, whether you look at medicine, whether you look at math, whether you look at music or astronomy or even modern digital systems, you find that logical systems were originating in India from a very, very long time, influencing George Boole, De Morgan, and others. So today's cell phones and other things, of course, Indians did not invent the transistor or IC. That was Shockley and others did that. But then the fact that we can have logical gates analyzed by Boolean algebra, that tells us that the inspiration has been this translation by Colebrooke in 1824. He translated Indian works on Pingala's logic, other logic, and such things. That has influenced Boole and De Morgan, and that is attested by Boole's wife, Mary Boole, a letter to Boole's that talks about that. So very interesting to see how Indian thought has seeded other parts of the world in various things. Also, India had an ecosystem of learning. If you take a look at this meme, for example, shows these several universities, but take a look at this book by Radha Kumar Mukherjee, as well as Apte's book or Sahana's book, and you find that India had a lot of universities that communicated information in all of these systems I'm showing you over here. These are all studied in ancient India. Then through that, I've also addressed knowledge going out of India. People tell me, if you tell me that knowledge went out of India, well, what was the route? How did it go to India? Who are the actors? Who are the people who took it? And how do you know what impact it had in the other parts of the world? I'm saying there are many, many routes, 3000 BC to 300 BCE, the routes of Indus Valley once there was climate-induced migration, Saraswati drying up and getting out, the Mitanni, Hittite, Elamite, Canaanite, Babylonian contacts. I'm showing that in other works, Vedic records of migration, Mycenaean period stories that are common between Greeks and Indians. So, and also the known travel by Greek scholars like Pythagoras and Satyrs and Democritus and many others who came to India in certain time frames and took knowledge. Then I'm talking about the Buddhist route for knowledge transmission, the Seleucid Empire, and the fact that in 200 BC and so on, Ashoka had sent his Buddhists all over to spread the word, including trade and other things. So this was 300 BC to 100 BC. There was a lot of exchange of information. Silk Route was a popular one for trade as well as knowledge. One example I give is the Boer manuscript. Boer manuscript is the oldest available document on Indian medical systems. It contains, it's a Gupta Prakrit script, and it contains a Bela Samhita, Charaka Samhita. It mentions the doshas, it mentions certain rishis by name. And where was it found? It was found in this region, Xinjiang province. It was found over here. So the fact that Indian medical text was found on the trade route tells us that Indian knowledge was also part of this transmission of knowledge all over this period, including to China and other places. Periplus of Erythraean Sea. This is a document by a Roman sailor that tells them where are the ports in India to sail. So they had come from Mediterranean lands, cross this land bridge over here, then take the Red Sea and all the ports for trading, come here up to Sindh, Lothal, and all these places, trade over here and go back. So this is a trade they had. We know all the things they traded, and knowledge is also part of one of these transmission. And then we also know Muslim transmissions from the time Bin Qasim came to Sindh all the way to 1600 current era. Enormous transmissions and translations of Sanskrit texts into Persian and Arabic took place. And this was a Muslim empire all the way from India, Sindh over here, through Arabia, through Northern Africa to Spain. This is all Islamic, Abbasid Caliphate. And so Indian knowledge was injected from India, translated into Arabic, injected into southern Spain, and translated by the Christian monks in northern Spain, in Toledo, who would translate the Arabic text into Latin. And that is how from the 10th century to the 14th century, the Europeans are ramping up on their own knowledge of sciences, which they did not have. It was Indian knowledge via the Muslims. So I've talked about this additional route, European church travelers, 10th to 19th centuries, translation schools, I just talked about that. Colonialists, Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, these are also directly taking information from India to other places. And today, all this knowledge has been destroyed in India and or discredited. and is repackaged and come back to us without citations. I will not talk about this poverty. There is a lot of information out there. So my conclusion is that we have examined the evidence for an ancient Indian civilization. It is clear that with the amount of deep knowledge systems in India, it is not possible to have accumulated so much of knowledge between 1200 BCE till the time the Muslims destroyed learning in India around, let's say, 11th century or 12th century and so on. It's not possible. So you must have had a long gestation with knowledge systems. We have seen Indians are highly accomplished in a wide variety of fields: math, medicine, astronomy, grammar, arts, architecture. I've not shown you this, but I would like to call your attention to the Shanti mantras in the Rig Veda. Shanti mantras are not saying, God, make me rich, kill my enemies, let only I prosper, and other such things. They are instead saying high thinking, like Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramaya. They're saying, let the whole world prosper, let everybody be healthy, let everybody be happy. So it shows that you have transcended your narrow requirements and are thinking of community, not just community of your country, not just country of the entire world or the entire cosmos. That shows highly cultured people from ancient times. And we see throughout India, there is evidence of cultural similarity. I've shown to you some hint of knowledge transmission to the world. Archaeology is corroborating some of the antiquity seen in astronomy. So I'm saying antiquity plus knowledge system plus transmission plus high thinking, that is the evidence for the ancient civilization of India. So I started out the talk by putting the propositions. I have now struck off all these propositions and I'm upholding these propositions. That evidence is showing it's an out of India, ancient civilization. I didn't talk about this, but no time for that. Invasions are responsible for widespread poverty. Indian thought impacted the East and the West, and we impacted the Greeks and Babylonians. And the identities, racial, genetic, or otherwise, are spurious and manufactured identities. All right, I think I've come to the end of my talk. So thank you very much for your patience. I'd like to open it up for questions. I know I've gone very, very quickly because I'm mindful of the time. So can we request the host to unmute everybody? And
yes, sir.
You can please organize the questions. Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. We already have some questions, and the first question comes from Abhishek Anand. Abhishek Anand, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Thanks for the talk. So I have two questions. First, on the astronomical model, I think one reason why it gets undermined is that Indic researchers are themselves divided over the interpretation. For example, astronomical dates for Mahabharata range from 1793 to 5561 BC. For Ramayana range from 5500 to 12,000 BC.
Right.
So we are ourselves divided, and that's why. What are the thoughts on that? I mean, how can this be addressed?
So let me take that question first. I'm not good at remembering two questions. I'll take the first question first. So the problems with Indian astronomy were not present day issues. These are pretty ancient in the sense, the colonial period. So when the British came to India, in my talks I've said, they came with the biblical model. The biblical model told them that God created the world in 4004 BCE. So this is the thinking of the average educated Englishman of 1700s, 1800s, believed in this model. The creation date from the Old Testament genealogy of their prophets was 4004 BCE. They also believed God destroyed the world in Noah's flood in 3000 BCE. So they said nothing can have survived the flood event except through the family of Noah, which is basically Ham, Japheth, Shem. And they thought these are the people who populated the various parts of the world. It is their history that we are studying today. Then, like I said, they found evidence for this so-called Kali Yuga episode. The fact that the texts and the tables used in India were referring to an epoch in 3102 BCE. This caused great consternation when Lee Gentle published his works. This French guy who came to India in 1700s. When he published his work, and additionally, he also found that he was observing an eclipse from Pondicherry through a telescope, and he found some Brahmins over there. The Brahmins were quickly doing some calculations using their shells and other things, and they said eclipse will start at this time and end at this time. He is shocked. And then he says the best European tables were off by more than a minute or so, whereas these Brahmins random people sitting there and calculating it, were able to get a much more accurate estimate of the eclipse duration. When he published these things, this is what caused great consternation in Europe, thinking that the Indians had highly advanced knowledge. This is what caused the knowledge rush to India. Every colonial power that came to India, first they wanted the texts of India because they wanted to control the knowledge and be top of the game. So the problems of the Indian astronomy started there. How can the Indians have something that is more ancient than the biblical flood? It is not possible. Either the flood is wrong or the Indians are wrong. That is why if you see the writings of Max Muller, William Jones, and a lot of others, they repeatedly declare that I believe in the Genesis account. I believe in the Old Testament. And they say that either our religion is correct and the Indians are wrong, or vice versa. I choose to go with our religion is correct. So they were all motivated by a desire to reduce the chronology of India, primarily based upon the astronomy they were finding. So these discussions are not new. These discussions have happened even in the past, where people have gone here and there. Eventually, there were so many missionaries who tried to discredit Indian texts. There was one person called John Bentley who wrote an entire book on Indian astronomy, where he alleged that many of them are forgeries. He said that he encountered Brahmins who had said they'll write any date they want if he gives them money. We don't know whether he even is telling the truth. He couldn't even speak any of the Indian languages. So what was he saying? So bottom line, they brought fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the classic FUD into this picture, where they tried to discredit the Indian works. Finally, Max Muller put his stamp on that, also saying that Indian works are unreliable. So by saying that, they took the entire astronomy out of the debate because it does not fit their model. Even today, there are Indian professors in India who are sympathetic to the chronology of India, but they will not admit this data because they are following Max Muller's thinking that it is discredited. So today, like you said, we have the problem of various scholars coming with various dates of Mahabharata and Ramayana. And my best take is, I think we have to be analytical in our approach. We have to try and see what is the data that the various scholars are proposing. So one has got to see, is the data valid? Is the data interpreted correctly? Is the data taken completely in context? So for example, if somebody comes and tells me I have a date for Ramayana, and guess what? It is fitting the astronomy of when Hanuman jumped from after Sri Lanka, all the nakshatras he saw. It's fitting that chronology. It is fitting the chronology of Rama's date, except that there's about 2,300 gap between Rama's date and Hanuman's jump. That's a problem. Chronology has got to be sequential in the order that is seen. If you cannot fit that, we have a problem. So we have to see the dates that are being proposed by researchers. Is that consistent? If it is not consistent, we have a red flag. What is the problem? Is the problem the data is wrong? Is the interpretation wrong? Are the methods wrong? And so on. So as analytical people, I would advise that the methodology adopted by each researcher has got great value. The data that is uncovered by each researcher has also got great value. So we have got to continue seeing the data, continue seeing the hypothesis by these various researchers, and try to understand in the framework of logical, scientific understanding and progression, how can we advance the knowledge systems? I think that is the best way that we should do it. And we should not be in a hurry or upset that the researcher A is saying 2000 BC, researcher B is saying 3000, other one is saying 5500 BC. I think these are all data and hypotheses on the table, and one has got to continue to do the diligence and see where all this is taking us. That's my best answer.
Thank you, sir. Abhishek, ask the second question which you have.
Yeah. So this one is on genetics. So even the AMT darling David Reich argues in his book that the Pi homeland was probably not in the steppes, but somewhere in Armenia or Iran. And we also have proxy evidence of human migration from house mice and cattle and all those things against the Aryan invasion theory. And these are also published papers. I mean, research published papers. So why does the mainstream intelligentsia not address these? I mean, they are not considered as, you know, when somebody writes a book like Tony Joseph, these are not considered, but the other side is considered.
Right. So I think the answer to that question is there is not scientists. You know how scientists work. There is a research grant. There is a proposal they write. The grant is awarded for that, and they recruit the postdocs and the researchers to do it. They do the research. They publish it in some journal, or they revise it, publish it, and so on. So this is the method. Nobody is looking for the grand narrative of India. Nobody's doing that. These are big problems out there. If somebody takes a big problem and makes a research grant or a proposal out of it, they laugh him out. If somebody comes and says, I'm going to see the origin of caste system and I need $100,000 to do that, and I actually laugh at them and say, I'm not going to fund things like that. However, if you take a very narrow and time-bounded activity that can give a clearly identified milestone and results, you have greater chance of funding. So nobody takes these grandiose projects out there. Grandiose projects are for the dreamers. I'm not saying dreamers in a bad way. I'm talking about the people who have got a grasp of the entire ecosystem, about the history and so on, need to write books that are of a scholarly nature that will advance these theories. And these theories can be taken up as hypotheses by future generations of researchers, and one can change the narratives. So the process by which today science accepts new data, how do we accept? It's a consensus. The consensus comes about when somebody advances something slightly, it is peer reviewed, it gets into A-class journals like Nature or IEEE or things of that nature. Eventually more people refer to it, or maybe a product is made out of it if it is engineering. So we know that, yes, that is accepted by the mainstream and as science advances. So for the new evidence to be admitted in a grand narrative of India calls for a great number of people coming, writing popular books, ideas, movies, other things, capturing imagination and doing these things. So I think it is a responsibility of everybody. It is my responsibility, your responsibility, everybody to understand, spread this information, understand these things, and try to advance it first by the popular media, by the popular social media and other such things, eventually reaching the academia, textbooks, and other changes. The change has got to happen. The data is staring at us. Right now, we have got the inertia of the past, the colonial people, the 5 agencies that I talked about, they are controlling the narrative of Indian history, and they are controlling what is written in the textbooks. It's up to us now to try and say that these are the methods they used. This is the reason why those methods are wrong. This is the reason why that has to be revised and what we have to do. So these have got to be focused papers that demolish each of these constructs and advance a new way of doing things. Sometimes also remember, at least in today's India, everything is not logical and rational. Don't assume just because we publish a paper, things are going to change. Ideology has taken root strongly in India. This idea of secularism, this idea of class dynamics, this has taken such a strong hold in India that people are reluctant to go against the tide because they are worried what will happen if I come around and say something that is contrary to what people are thinking. Nothing to do with logic, nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with rationality, but this is being thrust on the nation by ideological interests. I don't know how we contest that other than constantly trying to say it does not make sense. I hope that answers your question, Abhishek.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. The second question is from Angel Anthony. Please go forward the question.
Hi, good morning, Dr. Vedam. My question is mostly around the astronomical events that you have explained or put it on the slide. Are they mostly based on the type, like the Sanskrit texts such as like Pancha Siddhanta? Are they mostly observations, or is that extrapolations that might have happened in the past?
Excellent question.
And I have one more question.
Yeah, let me take one by one. My short-term memory is not that good, so I'll take it one by one. That's an excellent question. So archaeologists go to the field, dig it up, they get an artifact, and then they try to see what sense does it make, which strata of soil it is in, carbon dating, all those things. Astronomers try to go to the texts and they try to dig out references that are astronomical in nature. If there's any astronomical observation, then they take that piece of data out and try to see what is it trying to tell us, what sense does it make. So like you rightly point out, not all data is in the same category. There is some data, for example, like Yajnavalkya, Shatapatha Brahmana, he's coming and saying, Kritika never moves from the eastern direction. That is a very strong statement. That is a very strong measurement. Such a heliacal rising of Kritika has never happened since 2982 BCE. The next time it will happen is add another 26,000 years to it. That is when it will happen next, because of precision that I talked about, the cyclical phenomena. So those kind of data are very, very clear. Second kind of data, when Lee Gentle came to Pondicherry and he got the tables of Trivellor from the Brahmins over there, the Pandits over there, he analyzed the tables. He was not a good mathematician. He sent it off to his buddy called Cassini, who was a mathematician, astronomer in Italy. And he studied those tables. These are tables of movements of the heavenly bodies, movements of Saturn, Jupiter, planet, elaborate tables, center of equation, motion equations, and things like that. By analyzing those things, they could make out that the origin for these things is this 3102 BCE. That is also a hard fact. So we have got tables from which we have inferred an ancient date. We have got actually an encoding of an phenomena like Kritika never soars from the east. We also have phenomena that calls out where was the sun at a given solstice or equinox, Uttarayana point, Dakshinayana point, or the center point, or the Shankranti. Where was the sun? Which nakshatra was it in? When the sun is out there, you can't see the star there, right? Stars are blown away. However, the Indians were so intelligent that our ancestors are so intelligent that if in the night sky there was a star over there, let's say that's one of the Chitra Nakshatra, they try to design the 180 degrees away another nakshatra in that portion of the sky, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So nakshatras are not randomly distributed in the equal segments of 13 and 1/3 degrees, but sometimes they didn't select the brightest star. They selected the second brightest star because that fits in very well with this 180 degrees that I'm talking about. So by looking at the night sky, where the nakshatra is, they were able to say where the Surya nakshatra is. By looking at the lunar nakshatra, by inference, if it's a full moon, 180 degrees away, the sun is over there, what's the nakshatra over there? So they were able to call out the Surya nakshatra at the solstice points and about the equinox points, and those are also hard evidence. Using that, we can date precisely when was something done. Others are of a secondary inferential nature. For example, in Kalidasa's work, right, in Meghaduta, he's saying Vashya Ritu began in Ashada Masa. What does that mean? Vashya Ritu means rainy season. Ashada Masa means the month of Ashada. That means full moon appeared in the Ashada Nakshatra. That means where was the sun? We can infer all of those things. So today in India, the rainy season, the monsoons does not start when the full moon is in Ashada Nakshatra. It starts in the Mriga Nakshatra. We have got 2 nakshatra difference between Ashada to Mriga. This is because of the precision that I talked about, the 26,000 year cycle. Precision rate is approximately 920, 970 years per nakshatra. So if there is a 2 nakshatra difference, you multiply that by approximately 1,000, you come to the figure of 2,000. That 2,000 tells us that whoever made that observation in Meghaduta, writing that Ashada Masa, Vashya Ritu began Ashada Masa, wrote that 2,000 years ago. So this is of a secondary inferential nature. So it's a whole boatload of data like this in the Indian texts, whether it is a Rig Veda, whether it is a different Veda, Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, many thousands of measurements are there. And using these measurements, some of which are direct measurements, some of them are inferential nature, we can collate and say this is the data. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. So yeah, I have one more follow-up. What is? I mean, you mentioned about the knowledge transfer that might have happened between like Indic region and other regions of the world. What do you think might be the importance of the similarities and between the work that Virahamihira did from like the Pancha Siddhanta, right? Like Paulisa Siddhanta, Romaka, Surya Siddhanta, Vasishta, and the other one is like the Pidamaka Siddhanta, right? And another similarity between Yavana Jataka that might have happened probably like 200 years or 300 years before Virahamihira's time. So why do you think Virahamihira might have documented that?
I get your question. So there are allegations that India got the zodiac model, the Rashi model from the Greeks. And this contact probably happened in this time frame when the Greeks were in India. And Virahamihira's works, his commentary on the existing Siddhantas, that talks about Romaka Siddhanta, Paulisa Siddhanta. This seems to show evidence of such thought. Such allegations are present in in the apologist thinking, European apologist thinking, especially these three gentlemen, Otto Neugebauer, David Pingree, and Kim Lofgren. Otto Neugebauer's student was David Pingree, who was a professor in New York. David Pingree's student is Kim Lofgren. The first two gentlemen are gone. Kim Lofgren is still alive. She's a young lady. So their works was to try and show that by analysis of the cuneiform texts in Babylon, this is not the old Babylon, this is a new Babylon, which is around 600 BC, 800 BC, and so on. By analyzing that, they propose reconstructions of the mathematics used there. For example, square root of 2 and other such things. On the Plimpton 320, I forget the exact number, Plimpton, all the Plimpton texts, they try to decode the cuneiform text there and said that by our modern understanding of mathematics, they try to say, how did the ancients compute root 2? And they try to reconstruct saying this is how they might have done this root of 2 in the base 60 system they used. So Neugebauer's theory was Indians were using Babylonian ideas and the fact of the length of the longest day to shortest day, which would take the solstice to the equinox and other things. From one end of the solstice, or the northern solstice, southern solstice. They try to say longest day to shortest date as the latitude that you're living in. With all these ideas, including something called the linear zigzag method of computation, they try to say that these ideas came from Babylon. So this idea was fortified by David Pingree, where he interpreted many of the Indian works in light of hypothesis that it came from Babylon. And Kim Lofgren has continued the tradition today. David Pingree's works have been criticized soundly by many researchers. I'll refer you to one name, Bill Mark, M-A-K, Mark. He's written several papers where he's criticizing even the copy of Yavana Jataka that David Pingree used to make his translations were faulty. It was a Nepali translation and that had many, many problems with it. The recension was not the right one. There were many issues. That's the first one. Second thing that he shows, he had a faulty translation. So the translation was wrong. So Bill Mark has come with enormously perceptive works where he's criticized Pingree and he even says that he's a liar. He's forged some of his results and he's done some very strong allegations over there. I also refer you to Subhash Kak's works. Subhash Kak, in one of his publicly available work, is compared Babylonian astronomy with Indian astronomy, and he's addressed David Pingree's results as well as Neugebauer's results very expertly. So please do see Subhash Kak. And a third person, I forget the name of the Indian author, Sharma, if I'm not mistaken, he's also criticized David Pingree's work. So my bottom line is there is a lot to be addressed in this question of did Varahamihira borrow or understand foreign works when he wrote his commentaries to the Siddhantas. One has got to see in the long line of literature, I did not talk to you about astronomy, roots of astronomy. It is clear to me that there is this long scholarly succession of works in India. For example, Surya Siddhanta is referring to 18 Siddhantas that are extinct, that are no longer available. It's referring to that. At least today it's not available. Maybe at some point Surya Siddhanta is available. We don't have it. Siddhantas are mathematical treatises of astronomy. Okay. So the earliest Indian astronomy started out in stories, and I've talked about that. Please see my talk, Some Science, Some Stories. I've talked about how the earliest encoding of astronomical wisdom was by metaphorical stories. That gave rise to Siddhantic astronomy, mathematical astronomy. Surya Siddhanta is talking, like I said, about 18 Siddhantas, which we don't have today. There's a clear succession where each scholar is referring to earlier works and so on. And by the time we come to Aryabhatta, it is clear that we have the model of rotation of the Earth. And my suspicion is that Aryabhatta also knew about heliocentrism, and there's some reasons I can't go into that in the short talk here. But by the time we come to Nilakanta Somayaji, we also had a partial heliocentric model where Nilakanta Somayaji, 1400s, he believed that Earth is at the center, the sun goes around the Earth, and all the planets go around the sun, which means Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Saturn go around the sun, and the entire collection go around the Earth. This is the model used by Tycho Brahe. This is the model that influenced even some of the European thought later on. Anyway, what I want to show is there is a long succession with citation that we know of gestation of knowledge in India. So it's irresponsible to come and say that a certain knowledge system came from Babylonians, where the evidence is very, very slim, reconstructed with today's knowledge systems. If you look at root 2, we find root 2 is computed in Baudhayana's works, in Silva Sutras. If you take a Silva Sutra, there is a certain verse, I forget the verse, in one of my talks I given the exact citation, where you find that root 2 has been computed by successive approximation method. Just with 3 steps, you get about 4 or 5 decimal accuracy in root 2. Whereas in the Babylonian method, it was based on a base 60 method of computation, and nobody knows how it came about. All you have today is a modern day reconstruction of what they must have done. But in Baudhayana Silva Sutra, the formula is there, how you do it and what you do it. So again, I say the evidence is very, very strong from the Indic context, whereas fragmentary when you go to the Babylonian context. So there is a lot of work to be done, Anthony. I hope that answers your question. There are more questions than answers. One cannot blindly accept the assertions being done by Pingree or by others. There are a lot of people who are criticizing their works. One has got to see those things too. So my recommendation to you, please see Bill Mark, please see Subhash Kak. I can't remember the third Indian author. I think it's KP Sharma, but I'm not certain about it.
Sure, thank you. I think you should do at least a session just focusing on the astronomical technology and everything. I mean, like, I also wonder why the heliocentric model kind of lost along the way. So I'll ask further questions if I have time later.
Certainly. And just to add a follow-up comment to that, just based on what you said, Yajnavalkya, Shatapatha Brahmana, as well as Aitreya Brahmana, they talk about a heliocentric model. For example, a metaphorical language that says the sun strings the planets to himself on a thread. See, the sun strings the planets to himself on a thread. That's an articulation of heliocentrism. In Aitreya Brahmana, it says the sun never sets nor rises. When somebody says that, it really means that it becomes a day there when it's night here, it becomes night there when it's day here. Again, an articulation of these things. So to me, it appears that ancient Indians, at least in 2982 BCE, had a notion of heliocentrism and an understanding of the heavenly bodies. However, we lost this knowledge. My best take for that is the smoking gun of the 200-year monsoon failure, 2000 BCE. Monsoon failure in the Indus as well as southern India, we lost a lot. And my belief is that a lot of this knowledge also went out, such that by the time of Aryabhatta, we had to rediscover many of these things. All right, let's go to the next question.
Thank you, sir. Next question is from Srini. Srini, go forward.
Yes, I have multiple questions. On the linguistic model, can the percentage of derived words be used to either dispute a particular PIE model? For example, if in Sanskrit, if PIE were supposed to be true, then there would be a lot of words from the local Iranian side, and they would be in Sanskrit. So is the percentage can be used to kind of dispute those theories?
So excellent question, Srini. Excellent question. So my best take on this one is that, remember, these are models. These are models where people attempt to put some notion of analytical understanding and some notion of logical, rational outcomes out of these. So there's the claim, there is a methodology proposed, there is some data analyzed in the context of this methodology, there are some rules proposed, grammar rules, transmission rules, rate of change, time rules, such that it fits certain phenomena, and a proposal is made. That is because this whole notion of linguistics is an exceedingly complex phenomena to capture in mathematical models. I hope you appreciate what I'm saying there. Exceedingly complex, nonlinear, distributed phenomena to capture in our mathematical models. So people have resorted to probabilistic models. People make use of things like Bayesian probabilities. If you're, I hope you are mathematically understand what I'm saying. So Bayesian probabilities are made use of in Markov chain kind of understandings of how a word changes, what's the transition probability that a syllable will change from this to that, and so on. And remember, when you're trying to find out the origin of Proto-Indo-European language, or let's not go there, let's go to southern India, let's go to all the so-called Dravidian languages and the Proto-Dravidian language, and they try to analyze that. What they do is take the, let's say, 100 word list or 200 word list of words that are cognates in the various languages, in Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, 100 words that are cognates of each other. Take that and try to see how did these words that mean the same thing change from one to the other in these languages in geography and in time. So this is the distributed nature of the problem. And so you have a transition probability that says it changed from one to another. And center point, you have some epigraphy, right? Because temples have got epigraphy that have got some hard data for you that says in 600, year 600, this is the epigraphy. In year 900, this is epigraphy. So you have some data which you put in your mathematical model saying these are the hard constraints. When you start from here, start with the probabilistic model, start with some guesses, and run your probabilities. When it converges by so many generations, it's got to touch these points here, and then let's see how far we can push it. So this is the nature of the mathematical models people are using today to propose what they do. And most people don't have a clue because most people don't know mathematics, let alone we say Bayesian probability, they run for their lives. So the bottom line is, when researchers propose these methods and publish in journals like Nature and other things, it confers a very high aura of respectability into it. However, the diligence must be done by the analytical person. One has got to go there and see what are the methods, what are the shortcomings of the methods, what are the assumptions used in the methods, what is the validity of the data, are there multiple answers, is the phenomena sufficient to be captured? And like you said, there are different counter examples and probabilities and of different words, vernacular and other things that are coming in. Can these be used to address this question? Yes, they can. There are so many phenomena. How did a language go from one to another? Some people say invasions will impose a certain change of language. Some people say if a king adopts a certain thing, everybody subjects will follow that. Some people say that if some very popular person comes and uses a certain word, by fashion it starts changing. Some people will say trade-based things. Somebody comes for trading, uses certain words, that way it changes. So there are many, many models for transmission and change of words in a language. And people accuse me of trying to simplify this more than it actually is. But if you were to break it down, you'll see that these are the fundamental ideas it is based on. Mathematical models are used to fit the observed behavior, but it is your guess whether these black box models like hidden Markov chain models can sufficiently describe the phenomena. So if you ask me, can I use percentages? I'd say, yes, go for it. That's a new model. Use this and propose that by your analysis, this is what you have found. That's an additional data point out there. And I'm skeptical if we'll find such a super model that will describe language change precisely. If such a model is done, it has got to be analytical and not a non-model based thing. Non-model meaning a probabilistic model. It cannot be that. Maybe you can use that, but it's got to also have a distributed component, non-linear distributed model in geography and time that has got the constraints sufficiently built. Such a model will have, even though it's a black box fitted model, it might have better semblance to reality. Yeah. Again, when you use constraints, you have to be sure that the history constraints you've used are correct. For example, if somebody says I've used Aryan invasion theory to get so many generations, that could be bogus. If you say, I went to Tanjavur and I saw the epigraphy over there, I know that Rajaraja Chola built it in 1020 current era and use that epigraphy. Yes, if that date 1020 can be accepted, maybe carbon dating with sufficient degrees of error, margins and things like that, yes, use it and do it. So in other words, do the diligence.
Thanks. Really helps. But also the spoken language also has an indicator of what that, I mean, some indicator of the origin, because that's really gone through the ages and it's in the spoken language.
Yeah, see, the problem with the spoken language is we know it is mutating. We know over time things are mutating. For example, if you take Old English, we start with English in 10th century, 11th, 12th century, you can't even recognize what they're saying. And even in 1800s, and they were using thy, thee, thou, and all those kind of things. And even the spelling show was S-H-E-W, for example. And today it's a different spelling. Similarly, I studied in Karnataka, right? So Kannada. So one of the things we studied was Hale Kannada. Hale Kannada means old Kannada. The old Kannada we are studying were poems by authors in 1500s, 1600s, 1400s, 1200s, and so on. And you find such a complex mix of old Tamil, Sanskrit, Kannada in that it's so hard to make sense out of that. For example, Neer Olagirthum Bemartha Oraga Patakam. That is a mouthful, that one. But it means that even though he was under water, Duryodhana was burning up with anger after the loss of the Kurukshetra war. So the language used there, you will not recognize in today's Kannada. So you know that today's Kannada has evolved to the current time. So I'm fond of saying something here, Srini. I say that if you think that the differential equation model that accounts the rate of change of some of these things and how things evolve, then one has got to see, is the language loose enough that is allowing you to go all over the place, or is the grammar of that language enforced so tightly that, mind you, grammar is enforced so tightly, for example, in Paninian grammar, is enforced tightly so that the variation is less. So you're between constraints, you're moving only between these things. So the purity is maintained in some way. So even in the transmission of today's, if you take today's language as an indicator of origins, one has got to be aware that a loosely restricted language will mutate widely, whereas a tightly constrained language with the rules of grammar and by the purity police, the language police, if there was such, let's say community pride or language pride, don't allow words to change and new words to come in. So if you were to do that, the rate of change is low, then you can say that, yes, it's some indicator of the past too. But there are clues all over. You're right that even in today's language, there's a deep embedding of some old words that gives clues.
Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, due to time restraint, we won't be able to take more questions, and we have to end it here only. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. You joined right from United States, and we are connecting in India. It's because of technology that we are able to connect so nicely. Thank you for joining us. And once again, namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you, and my pleasure to be with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.